2012 OSEP Project Directors Conference, Wednesday, July 25th, 2012. Marriott Wardman Park, Washington, D.C. The Art and Science of Long-Distance Collaboration. Practical Issues in Collaboration.
Okay, so what I thought I'd do is start
A
talking
man
about
sitting at a table in front of a
side the
class.
page, there's a thing at the top that says some issues, and so I'm going to try to talk in a practical vein about what kinds of things do you go do. One of the first things you need to do if you're looking for collaborators is to figure out what it is that you want to collaborate about. You know, as James was just saying, you have to be clear what you want from somebody. If you're going to go talk to somebody and start asking them questions, you need to know what it is that you're going to ask them about. Now, one thing that we do to try to clarify that, whenever we set off to write a new grant and we need to seek collaborators, early on in the process, we write what we call a prospectus. It's drawn from the notion, you know, that you get with financial, you know, institutions send you a thing about what they're investing in and so forth, and it's called a prospectus. So whenever you call someone up or email them and say, wouldn't you like to collaborate with us on this project, the conversation is going to end one way. It's going to end with, please send me more information about what you plan to do. And so you need to be able to respond to that, and what we do is write this prospectus so that we have something to send them immediately. And so by writing a prospectus, you can be clear in your mind what it is that you're asking for. Now notice, the project that we end up writing often bears no relation to what we wrote in the prospectus. But the prospectus is the thing that gets you started in how to do that. So in finding collaborators, there's really no magic to that. It's a lot of hard work. You have to figure out who to write to, who to ask, who to call, and you do that by doing things like coming to conferences like this, going around and finding, oh, here's someone who knows about online learning. So if I want to do something about that, I'm going to go talk to him, and either he'll help me, or he'll have his graduate students help me, or he'll know 12 other people that he wants to help. Wants you to go ask instead of asking him, and so forth. So you have to be alert to those people. So you're reading all of these papers. You need to keep up with the literature and read all of the papers, and then you start contacting all of those authors. I read your paper about this, and I found this part really interesting, and I would like to ask you a question. Now, in these emails you send out or telephone calls that you make, there's sort of two levels of message. There's a top message that was what you actually wrote, which was, you know, I liked what you wrote and I have a question I'd like to ask you, but there's this subtext, you know, wouldn't you really like to have a conversation with me, and wouldn't you really like to collaborate with me? So you're doing, now we're in the process of doing that in our center right now, in that we are interested in a variety of questions around what we call supported text and digital books, particularly in mathematics. And right now our current grant is focused on students with learning disabilities or vision impairments. So we go read all the papers that we can find. So if we're going to have a student read a math book, all the questions about readability come into play. How do you measure the readability of a math book and match that up with the reading ability, the mathematical reading ability of a student? Because we know those from all our other reading stuff, those two things have to match up, at least within the zone of proximal development. So how do you do that? Well, I've managed to find a small group of papers that talk about that, and I need to be in contact with all of those authors. So we have a formal process in our center for collecting this bibliographic information, analyzing it, tagging it, doing those sorts of things, and then we find contact information on all of those authors and we write to them. And it's sort of a boilerplate message, but it goes out. Now, to support that, the prospectus part of this is we have a place on our website where we have, you know, a page entitled, How Do You Measure the Readability of a Mathematical Text? And we have a little 2-page overview that sort of outlines some of the issues, particularly issues that we're interested in, and then it has this bibliography. So the message we send out is, we have your paper in our bibliography. We thought it was interesting because, and we have a sentence there about why we thought that paper was interested. We want to know if you've written any more papers in this area, And do you know of anybody else who's written papers in this area? Oh, by the way, we have a bibliography. Could you take a look at that and tell us which of those papers you think are the most useful? So you can see there's a variety of requests here that we send out to those people. And whenever they send us an answer back, our reply to them always has more questions in it, because you're promoting a conversation back and forth. And some of these conversations will grow up into being a collaboration with them. Yes?
Can I interrupt?
Yeah. Yes.
Just a quick question. Mark, while you're talking in terms of reaching out to potentially people that you would want to collaborate, in your initial contact with them, it seemed rather formal. Are there circumstances, both Jamie and Mark, where there would be more of an informal kind of communication that would start a collaboration, or recommendations that it already starts formal and then...
Yeah, in fact, I was going to add to what Mark was saying, because obviously, and we kind of do that same thing. I mean, I think being mission-driven and always having that prospectus is critical to what we do. And we all sit down and internally, whether even across, like within the online center, for instance, internally we sit across with KU, but then we also bring CAS and NASD in and say, okay, what are we trying to do here? What's our mission? And we do that same sort of thing. But most recently, I think there's two different, using social media appropriately is critical for kind of starting these collaborations. For instance, over the last 8 months, I've received a number of requests either on LinkedIn or on Twitter to meet on various things, or just through DMs and direct message on Twitter or on LinkedIn. In fact, recently on Friday, I received a message from a company here that works global, this is terrible, I'm not going to know it, I think it's called Global Learning, or World Learning. I received a message that they said, we work with USAID on global initiatives to educate, global workforce initiatives, et cetera, and we want to make sure we're providing appropriate and accessible services to students and all individuals. And so we're really interested in doing universal design for learning and applying that in everything we do. And so this came through LinkedIn, someone that had been introduced to someone, this network kind of effect. Would you be up for a phone call? So I emailed the person back Monday morning, actually, while I was sitting at the airport as I was ready to fly out. And she said, well, I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I'd love to have a phone call with you. And I said, well, I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. for the next couple of days. And so what happened was yesterday, we actually met. I went over to their headquarters, and we actually had a conversation around just informally about what they do and what I do. And I think this is one of those informal occasions. And that's happened a number of times, like over the last 6 to 8 months. But the notion of that is that, my Twitter account I use only for professional purposes. I only use it to post professional things. My LinkedIn account, obviously a LinkedIn account is that same sort of thing where you're really kind of focused on this professional life. But those types of informal sort of connections are critical to kind of starting conversations, because there's one company in particular that I've been working with recently that same sort of conversation started off that same way. I posted a review that I had done of a system that they had developed, and on Twitter I said, hey, everyone come take a look at this system, and talked about the accessibility of the system. And the CEO then direct message DM'd me back and said, hey, thanks for posting that, et cetera, et cetera. We should have a conversation. I'm based out of Silicon Valley, whatever. I was going out there the next week or so to work with another company, and we just happened to sit down and we were able to have a conversation, and that has kind of now spun into another network connection for one, but the ability to drive that into some of the research we're doing, because it then opens doors to industry folks. And so if we're doing research on, for instance, online learning, much of online learning right now in the K-12 sector is driven by what industry is putting out there. And so being able to knock on someone's door, or be able to pick up the phone and call a CEO, or being able to call someone in SIIA, the Software and Information Industry Association, is critical to gaining access so that we can actually do research on some of the products that are out there and in the hands of teachers, as well as being, that kids are using. So that's how it kind of starts, an informal sort of process. Yeah.
And the nature of that first contact depends a great deal on what you already know about the person you're trying to contact and what kind of relationship, if any, you already have with them. And also whether you have somebody in common. So quite often you're contacting somebody that's been recommended to you, and so you can draw upon that recommendation. Glenda Hill suggested that I call you to talk to you about this, and those sorts of things. So managing that network, whatever the tools are that you have to put some time and effort into that. Now, part of that gears takes off on what James just said is once you start this relationship, you have to find the right communication channel with them. There's some people who live on email. I'm one of those people. I sit and have email running all day. On the other hand, I don't Twitter. I'm never going to get his Twitter message. I figure there has to be one person in the universe who doesn't use Twitter, and I volunteered for that. There's some people who who would prefer to be called on the telephone. There's some people that you really have to go sit down and talk with because they just don't like mediated communications of any sort. And you have to figure out what that best communication channel is because you have to meld yourself to the way in which they want to talk. And of course, you have ways that you prefer to talk. And so there's part of the collaboration is working out what that communication channel is.